Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do on Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below the video, and that's where we pick from each week. We actually have a little over 20 for this one, and there's like at least more than half that many again written down as well, because there was a lot of questions from last week, as you would expect. You know, as we get closer and closer to spring here, that there's more questions. So there may be a midweek garden question and answer video as well, as we write the questions down from this one as well. So look for that sometime the middle of the week. Let's see. Also, the weekly garden planner continues to be $50 off for the month of March here. I should have added vines to the pruning list by the time you're watching this on Sunday morning. I have it done. I don't know if I'll get it onto the weekly garden planner, and the Learn to Garden video series has it as well. But I already have the shrubs, perennials, and trees. And it's a really basic list. If you want to know when to prune this Carolina Midnight Loropetalum, you just look up Loropetalum, and it'll tell you when to prune it. And so on that one, it's going to be after flowering. Same thing on that Osmanthus fragrans right there. Late winter, early spring happens to coincide with it finished flowering, so it'd be the same. It'd be the same regardless. But it's just it's a really simplified list of prune it after it flowers, or prune it in the late winter, or prune it in the fall. You know, that kind of thing. If it needs to be pruned. Not everything always needs to be pruned, but if it does need to be pruned, simple list, and that's included in the weekly garden planner and the Learn to Garden video series. But the weekly garden planner is $50 off for the rest of March. Okay, I have two garden talks coming up in the next couple of weeks. There's one over in the Charlotte Garden Club, if you remember there. That's on I think it's on a Monday night. It's the 17th of March. I think it's a Monday night. I should probably know that at this point. And it's on. The talk is called Soil Gardening, where I'm just talking about taking care of the soil ahead of, you know, the fun part, picking out plants, and then. I'm also doing a talk down at the Gardens of Southeastern North Carolina, down at Johnson Nursery, where we're doing that additional garden, which we put those wood chips, put that wood down last year. It'll be later this year before we really jump into that project, but I am speaking down there. I think that's March 29th. It's a Saturday, and I'm speaking from 11 a.m. till noon. I think there's a small fee for that one. You can go over there on the website and see what that is. But there's other speakers than me. I think David's speaking, and I think their gardener there or their head gardener for the Botanic Garden is speaking. And I should probably know more about it than that. But anyway, there's several things going on, including a tour of the garden, and the garden center will be open and all that kind of stuff. March 29th, I think that is. Okay, let's see. The open, about two Sundays ago on the Q&A, if you go to the bottom of that, it has all the hotels and everything. If you're coming to the open garden event here on June 20th and 21st, the Friday evening, Saturday morning, or Saturday afternoon. Those tickets are over on the website as well, and some of that money is being donated to other gardens. Keep that in mind as you buy those $25 tickets. And then we're gonna add to that next week some places of interest for Raleigh if you happen to be coming to Raleigh for our open garden here. But there's some. If you go back a couple weeks, there's already, if you're staying overnight, hotels, restaurants, that kind of thing. But we're going to add points of interest to that list for next week. And I already said the bonus Q&A is coming. All right, so let's jump into some gardening questions, because that's what the video is called. Just a ton of questions about lots of dieback on plants. So, I don't see any on the, this Osmanthus back here has some here and there, has some branches, where the tips have brown leaves on them. Most of this stuff, honestly, is just gonna get pushed off. It's just where the end of a branch, has a brown leaf, which is, they're obviously dead. There's a few on that Osmanthus, and there's a couple other plants around the garden where we'll end up having to clean them up. A lot of that stuff just will get pushed off, and already I can come over here and just kind of shake these few brown leaves that got damaged. And that, it stayed warm so late in the fall, and then it got cold quick. And so a few of the few of the leafy evergreens took a little damage like that, but not that many really, but a few did. They're kind of self-cleaning a little bit, and then there's some things that you'll probably have lost like a third of the growth out of the top of it, and you'll choose to cut it back. Again, I would wait on those cutback issues. We actually have a Mojo Pittosporum back there. We had 3 larger ones. We planted a slightly smaller one in the fall, and again, fall planting something that's, you know, barely hardy here. It's got some damage on it, but I wait until I see some new growth coming out in the middle to do that cleanup, if it needs to be done at all. So like I say, a lot of times that new growth will start and it'll just swallow, you know, the damaged growth that's on it. So if it's minor, you could probably just do nothing. If it died back a third or a half, you probably will need to clean it up some, but I would wait to see some new growth on it. And that's all about what the soil temperature is doing in your area. So for us, I think this morning, I'm still in pants for crazy for March for me. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, it's 42 out here, or 41 out here this morning. It's supposed to be like 36 tonight. That's flirting with the frost, you know, where there'll probably be pockets where it will be 32 and there'll be a little bit of frost. So we'll protect plants that we have in containers that are marginal, that are ahead of where they should be, because we brought some things back from Florida for another night. And I think the next 9 nights after that, it's quite mild. And so I think the soil temperature will come up real fast. And when that soil temperature starts to come up, you'll see buds already swelling on things, but you'll see things really start to get going. So it's a matter of getting that soil temperature 60, 65, and then boom, you know, the whole garden is awake super, super fast. For us, generally, that's right around March 15th in Raleigh. It gets ahead of itself because our average last frost date isn't until April 15th. But so I would expect it's kind of right on time, you know, as you're watching this video, another week. 9 days with the nighttime temperatures around 50, daytime temperatures in the 70s, it's gonna absolutely explode pretty quick. That was part of that question, is when to expect that. Does organic fertilizer help plants that had dieback? So it's gonna help all your plants if you need fertilizer in the garden. And I use I got my plant tone in the mail. I ordered a 50-pound bag from Amazon. It's I just got it yesterday, delivered. So I'll be slinging that out here in the next week or so. And I do very little fertilizing out here, period. So if you're asking me whether, let's say it's organic fertilizer, non-organic fertilizer, whatever it is, if you're asking me if that's the best way to have a plant recover, if the soil needed something, or if the issue with the plant was related to a nutrient deficiency, then yes, okay, it could be helpful, right? If you were iron deficient, or you were potassium deficient, or phosphorus deficient, whatever it is. But if you're asking me in general, the cold damage that you got on that plant during the winter time really probably had very little to do with, the fertility of your soil, and probably had more to do with the length of time that the plant had been in the ground, because early on they can be less cold hardy and kind of become more cold hardy in time. So it helps. I fertilize to show you guys how little I fertilize. Most of the fertilizing I'm doing is the leaves that I've left on the ground, and the compost that's been added out here, and the hardwood mulch that we use, the bark mulch, not the pallet chip kind of mulch, but bark mulch, and the wood chips that are in the paths out here, and that we originally started this project from. So that's where most of my feeding of these plants is coming. And I'm really kind of fertilizing to show you that I'm not, I'm fertilizing very little, because the plants, okay, so as long as your phosphorus, let's say you get a soil test done, you come back, and this is going to be part of my soil first gardening thing, and the phosphorus is a little bit low, okay, on the soil test. And you go, oh man, I probably need to add some phosphorus. You probably don't. What you probably need is beneficial microbes in the soil being allowed to survive more easily by having the ground covered in organic material. And those things can bring those nutrients to your plant. So as long as there's some phosphorus available, beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungi can get that material to the plants. okay? So you don't need everything in the soil absolutely perfect. You need some of everything to, in the soil, the iron and calcium and magnesium and those kinds of things. And there's some balance issues where you can get things out of balance, where you can have way too much magnesium to calcium in your soil and have a more compact soil. So there are some issues that can be created by out of balance nutrients in the soil. But for the most part, just having all those things present and then protecting the soil is the main thing, from extremes of heat and dry and cold and all the things I've talked about on the channel over the years. So don't push your plants I'm on question one. Don't push your plants to rescue them. Okay, that would be, that would be asking a lot. It'd be like, you're just getting out of the hospital from a heart attack and somebody says, hey, you should go run a 5K because that makes, that'll protect your heart in the future. You know what I mean? You're just not ready for it, right? You need to give that plant a minute to, get itself rested and get itself back together, and then maybe, throw a little nutrients at it. But I will generally fertilize a very small amount in the next week or two here. Okay. And then they said, i.e. holly tone for inkberries and leucothoe. So the only reason I have that written down is you don't need holly tone if your pH is below 7 or 6.5, below, let's say 6.5 for any of these acid loving plants. So most of the plants that you'll see me plant in this garden, with a few exceptions, I actually have a couple of things this year that we're planting that are would prefer more alkaline soils. I'll deal with that as I'm planting them. But most of these acid loving plants, my pH is 5.8. So I do not need to add sulfur, which is the main difference between the holly tone and the plant tone, is that one has sulfur to lower the pH some. I don't need to lower the pH. My pH is perfect. Plants have plenty of available iron out here. The pH is in the sweet spot for these things that like that. So that is the one soil test you should do, is your soil pH, and then you'll determine whether or not, if your pH is too high and you're trying to use some of these, plants that would prefer lower pHs, you would use holly tone, that sulfur, to adjust that pH some. Short-term fix, but anyway, that's why I wrote that down. You don't need holly tone just because you're planting hollies, okay? If your soil pH is already low, let's say below 6.5, you don't need it. The azaleas, rhododendrons, camellias, hollies, all the things that might be on that bag for acid-loving plants. You don't need that type of fertilizer if your pH is low. That was all part of the first question. Okay, number 2, prune black lace elderberry when it's too large. How will it affect flowering? And then another person asked if they can be reset pruned. Yeah, you can absolutely reprune Sambucus nigra, I guess. You can prune those to the ground and treat them like a perennial, a dieback perennial, if you want to, in the late winter. If that's how radical you needed to get with it. So you can absolutely reset prune one. In general, I think you'll see light pruning, kind of just cleanup kind of pruning can be done. It can be done after flowering, or it can be done in the late winter. And I think that's probably how I have it on the list there, is either one is fine. But you can absolutely cut that plant, that black lace elderberry, right to the ground in the late winter and just let it recover from that if you want to, or if you need to. The typical pruning would be to go, if it's not too large, would be to go out, look at it and say, to get rid of some of the oldest wood right down to the ground, and then any kind of cleanup that you need to do, and evening up branches, cutting off crazy branches. That'd be a more typical pruning this time of year. But if it needs to be reset, this would be the time to do it. Let's see. Somebody said, when mulching in the spring, should I be concerned about covering over emerging perennials and bulbs? Will they push through? Yes, this is a delicate balance for sure about burying some of these perennials in 3 to 4 inches of mulch, especially as they're emerging. This is the weird little spot here where this is the best time of year for your spring mulch application for sure, because we're going to have weeds germinating in a few weeks. So it's good to get the ground covered and cleaned up and, put a cap down on preventing some of those weeds from germinating. But you also I have bulbs popping up everywhere out of the ground. So if I was going to mulch, I'd be a hair late doing it. Now you got to kind of get down. You can still do it, but you probably need to get down on your hands and knees a bit around some of those things and make sure that you're not burying them in mulch. But I would still do it. Something just jumped here behind me. It's a bird. I would still do it, but you got to unfortunately get a little bit more delicate around the things that, you know, the new perennials that are emerging and that kind of thing. And be thinner coats on the perennials for sure than your shrub areas, because a lot of them can really push up to it. Like hosta and daylilies and a lot of those really tough perennials, those ones that just, you don't seem to be able to kill, you know, those will always push up through. But some others are, you know, a little less likely to. Let's see. Perennials haven't shown up yet in 9A Alabama, usually show earlier. Could 8 inches of snow and 10 inches harm them? Mainly Amsonia. So Amsonia definitely can take 10 degrees. That's really not an issue, and the snow is not a problem. You know, most all Amsonia is going to be extremely cold hardy, but definitely things are emerging slower than they have in the past. And I think I said when we were down at Juniper Level Botanic Garden, I think I said it in another video this week, that normally when we're there, it's a little further along on that. I always go toward when I go for the winter visit, I always go on that last day of the last weekend, which is a Sunday, because by then all the trilliums tend to be blooming, and a lot of them were just barely out of the ground. Some were, but a lot of them were just barely out of the ground. So we've got some daffodils that have pushed through, some hyacinths that are already blooming. I think those daffodils over there that are in bloom are just out of frame, but a lot of other daffodils are just, that had bloomed out already last year, are just barely up at this point. So it's an interesting year where it's keeping things asleep longer, which is good. I mean, quite frankly, I'd rather have the stuff stay asleep through March and not have to worry about it, not have to protect it. But I think you'll see things popping out of the ground pretty soon, and it's probably a non-issue ultimately. So somebody has tomatoes seeded, grown, and they're ready to be planted in North Raleigh. When can they put them out? Whew. You really wouldn't want to put them out before the soil temperature is above 65 degrees, and that's going to be a little while, and even 70 degrees is probably better. Peppers especially, you don't want to be putting out early like that. What will happen, that's way too early for your tomatoes to be ready to go in the ground. You know, right here at the beginning of March, we're just starting our tomato seed. So tomatoes are typically about 6 weeks from seed to transplant size. So our average last frost date here in Raleigh is about April 15th. You might see it April 12th or 18th or whatever, but I always say April 15th. It's just easy to remember. So March 1st is about 6 weeks from that, right? Or March 4th or so is about 6 weeks from that. So that's about the time we start our tomato seed. That way our tomato plants are ready as the soil temperature is high enough to stick them in the ground. If you stick them in the ground right now, you'll get, the soil temperature's too low. And what I've seen in the past is you'll get these really purpley leaves where there's a phosphorus deficiency occur. It's like the plant roots in cold soil cannot get nutrients working properly. They can't bring nutrients up into the plant properly, and you'll get off-colored leaves and strange growth, and interesting problems will occur. So probably your best with these seeded tomatoes to just put them in slightly larger containers for now and space them out a little bit and be in a position to protect them for the next few weeks. Try to keep that soil a little warmer, and that way you'll have larger transplants when it's time to put them in the ground. But yeah, this is a lot of our seeding videos. We're going through that. It's just everybody's in the house after Christmas and in January, you know, going, what can I do for the garden? And they start seeding things super, super early. Now, if they do end up stretching some, which they likely will, you can plant tomatoes deeper into the ground than other things. So where I'm sitting here showing on shrubs, never bury anything too deep. There are exceptions to that, and tomatoes are an exception to that. You can actually plant them down to the first leaf, you know, this far down into the ground if you want to. That's probably what you're going to end up needing to do, actually. To not have them floppy in the ground. But yeah, you're a little early for sure, a month, 5 or 6 weeks early from being able to put them in the ground and not have to worry about them going through some sort of strange nutrient deficiency issue. Peppers are even later than that for putting them in the ground. You really, you know, you put peppers in the ground April 1st, and let's say you don't get any kind of frost, nothing happens, but the soil temperature is still pretty cold. And then I plant mine on May 1st, and mine will pass yours. It's just, it's kind of crazy how that, they'll just, if they go into warm enough soil and it's a good seedling, they'll just explode and start growing really, really fast. Where the other one will have to recover from the issues that it, you know, had from the soil being too cold. So somebody has a Mackie podocarpus in Davidson, North Carolina, zone 8A. They fall planted it, but didn't really water it. It turned brown all over. It's got 2 green stems only. They pruned the brown out. Is it worth saving? Can it be saved? If it's still got green on it, it's alive, and it will come out of this. But I tell you what, I don't know. I think the podocarpus is out of frame here. I've got a podocarpus right here, but it's probably out of frame. That one's about 6 feet tall. That it'll recover from it, but super, super slow. And this is what we say about conifers: is we want to be really super careful with our conifers and not letting things lean on them, not letting issues happen to them. Obviously, with this, it was cold. It wasn't on you, but we'll have, you know, annuals planted all over the place, and we'll forget about some conifer and let it lay on it for a while. Now it's got a big bare spot, and it just takes forever for them to recover, as opposed to the leafy evergreen plants, where if I killed this section right here, I'd just cut the top and I'd get new leaves there pretty quickly. So it's going to take a long time. So if it's someplace that you really need it to look better sooner, I would replace it and they can put that one somewhere else and let it recover for a while. So somebody said I spoke about making grafted weeping plants taller, i.e. a weeping cherry. I said they'd have to train a new stake higher. How exactly do you do that? You need a small piece of growth up at the top, because you can't bend. Let's see if we can come around here to this weeping. Let's see. So on this weeping redbud, it's so old now, it's all woody up here. I don't have anything up here that I could bend up. If I tried to bend up one of these stems, it'd absolutely break. So what I really need is probably to make a couple cuts on this up here, cut a couple larger branches back, and see if I can force some new growth up here and some dormant buds. And then once I get a little small limb up here, I can start to stake that. You have to start with something small, because these things are not, when they're young, and I can break one off right here. When the stems are young, you know, on this is a red bud, but it would be the same with the Japanese maple or a cherry or anything. When they're young, I can bend them like this. And so I can start to bend this up is a new leader, and I could let it grow another foot or two and then cut it off, and that would then start weeping downward from where I have it staked. But everything I have up at the top of that plant right now is all super thick woody stuff. If I try to bend that stuff, it's all gonna break. So again, I think you just need to cut a limb up near the top if you don't have anything that's wispy already. And that should stimulate some growth near that cut that will allow you something like this. This is the type of thing that you can restake upward, because everything on this plant wants to do this, okay? It just wants to grow literally straight down at the ground or on the ground, and it has to be actually physically staked up to do that, to fix it. I've always said I should change the name of the channel to Wood Chips with Jim Putnam or Laura Petalum with Jim Putnam. The other one I get is should be Red Buds with Jim Putnam, maybe, because there's always so many red bud questions. Everybody loves red buds, and all these new hybrid red buds are, you know, with chartreuse leaves and variegations and dwarfs and weeping varieties and purple foliage, and, you know, they're just and they're great plants. But I end up with a ton of questions on them. This person can't see the root flare of their native redbud they planted by a landscaper. How to fix this? They're concerned about if they expose the flare, they'll create a bowl around the plant. So yeah, if you go in there and start digging it out, two things are going to happen. One, you're going to start getting water down into the bottom of it, which could, may end up being too much water. And the other, it really needs to be physically raised up. So I don't know how long it's been in the ground, but it probably needs to actually be dug back up and raised up. I mean, that's really the only solution to it. I mean, if you go in and you start, if somebody's buried the root flare with a mulch volcano, that's something you can go back and take care of. But if they physically put it down in the soil too low, if you dig that out, then you're creating a bowl around the tree that could have some adverse effect, almost as bad as, you know, being planted too deep. So it really needs to be raised up. It's got good news from Jim. That's what I should call this channel. Let's see. Somebody bought a Japanese maple from box store. That probably doesn't matter. Has distorted branches that perhaps being packed too tightly. Will branches change, and what is the remedy? I don't know it'd be about it being packed too tightly, and I don't know what you mean by distorted branches, but a lot of these trees are just grown too close together in the nurseries, and you know, they're not shaped particularly well, especially Japanese maples. Japanese maples just don't become. We did that Japanese pruning video with Jim and Lynn Swanson a week and a half ago. If you haven't watched that, Japanese maples, when they're small and they're newly grafted, don't look like what they're going to look like in the future. So if it's a small plant that you bought in a container, whether it be from Mr. Maple or from a box store or from a garden center or wherever it is, it's going to probably require some work. There's going to be some decisions on branches. You know, I've got a Bihu Japanese maple back there, and it's basically got two trunks on it. I've staked the one that I think is going to be the main leader, and I'm eventually going to cut this bottom other side leader off of it, but I'm not doing it yet. But I bought that plant. It's a nice looking plant, but it's not at only 3 feet tall. The decisions that would have been made on it had it stayed in a nursery until it was a 15-gallon or 25-gallon plant or a much larger plant have not been made yet. So you've inherited making those decisions on what branches are going to come off and what the overall shape of it. It's best to know what kind of Japanese maple it is and to know what the general shape of it should be in the future. And then you can start working toward, you know, that. Is it vase shaped? Is it wide? Is it a weeping plant? Is it, you know, do you want it to have multiple leaders? All those kinds of things. So knowing what variety it is may help you, lead you to how to achieve that look that it normally has. Because again, you're inheriting a plant that just got grafted, grown out for a season, and went to a store, and and some of the other ones went to other nurseries, and they're in the process of doing what I'm saying that you'll do on yours, which is make decisions on what limbs will come off, what limbs will stay, what's the leader, that kind of thing. Okay. So somebody bought some bare root Dicentra in zone 7A. Any of those bare root, there may be some exceptions to this, but most of the bare root things, bare root roses definitely can go in the ground. Bare root hydrangeas could go in the ground. But if you're buying any of the perennials that are bare root, or you're buying some of the dahlias that you can get bare root, just the tubers this time of year. If you're buying any of those things, which are all available right now, it's too early to put them in the ground, especially if they've started growing, they're ahead. They've been in a store where it's maybe 75 degrees all the time, and you know, your garden is not that, so they're ahead regardless of what they look like. They're best to be potted up. And go back and look at my Jumpstart videos on the channel. All you have to do is go to the channel and search Jumpstart. Just follow this. I don't think I've done Dicentra, but any of these bare root things you're buying this time of year, if they're a little ahead as you're buying them from everything else out in your garden, then hold them back, put them in a container, grow them out for a couple of weeks while you're waiting for your average last frost to pass by, and then you put them in the ground. Okay. What plant would you and Steph like more than one of? And for Steph, that's definitely Rose's Blush blueberry. We have one in the front garden, maybe the best 12-month plant we have in this garden. It's a Darrow's blueberry. I think the single plant video, I moved from the Garden Plants channel to this channel this past week. So this week or last week, if you want to look at that. I don't think many people have watched it because they had already watched it over there. I'm just consolidating these two channels into one. But that Rose's Blush Blueberry, and pretty much everywhere we see it, all the nurseries in the South grow that plant. It probably should just be widely, more widely used. Has very small blueberries on them. They're tasty. We just let the birds have them for the most part. Although we had a lot of kids here for the open garden last year, and they were all enjoying those blueberries because about June when they're ready, they'll flower here in the next few weeks. But it's bright purple out there in the front garden. Look at that video. It's his best 12-month plant in this garden. And it's Steph's favorite, so we'll probably put a few more over there in the native garden as well, because it's just such a great winter interest plant. For me, it's probably whatever I've been talking about recently. My favorite plant could evolve on a day-to-day basis. I have a hard time really locking in on, I used to grow so many camellias, and I would have said, for years, I would have said camellias were my favorite plants. I like winter flowering things because that time of year was my slow time in the nursery business and the landscape business, and so I liked a lot of those winter interest things. So it would probably be one of those at any given time, but literally I can go from one plant to the next and probably call that next plant my favorite plant. So I am definitely, at the end of the day, just a total plant collector. I would like to, have one of everything, just so you could, have it to teach on this channel and be able to, to be able to see how they evolve over the year. But there's nothing, weirdly, there's nothing that I just draw in on and go, hey, that I would have 10 of those for sure. Because me having 10 of those would unfortunately take 9 other things away that I could be growing, right? So that's the way I think about having more than one, on a I would not design for a customer like this, unless the customer wanted something like this, obviously, but for my customers, I didn't plant like this. I planted, in groupings. There might be one single interest specimen plants here and there, obviously, but it was groups and waves and things like that. And I did a lot of work up in North Raleigh. This part of Raleigh has pretty small lots in comparison. The North Raleigh has much larger lots. And so, up there, if you planted one of everything, you'd have 3,000 different plants in the garden. So up there, I was planting large swaths of things. So this is not necessarily the way I would done for a customer, but it's my personal decision is I want as many different things as I possibly can acquire, just because I enjoy them and enjoy talking about them and watching them. Let's see. Okay, so here's a good question. Does all the breeding in perennials, I guess from that perennial video, that 20 plus perennial video that I put up the other day that we shot down in Cairo, Georgia, at the Flowerwoods location in Cairo, Georgia, does all the plant breeding change it as a pollinator plant? Yeah, sometimes it can change it for the negative and sometimes for the positive, right? If all we do is take a straight species of, let's say, a particular coneflower, and we seed it out, and then we just look at it and go, this one stays a little shorter, it's a little more compact, and it has more flowers on it. And that's what we selected for, that's gonna be a better pollinator plant probably in the garden. It's gonna be if you're picking it so it's a sturdier, more vigorous plant and it has more flowers on it and the flowers are still shaped the same, that's gonna be a positive, right, for pollinators. But if let's say I select one because it has this, full, complete double flower and we can't even see the inside of the flower anymore, like on some dahlias where I see the bees really can't get down in them, you've probably made it, less of a pollinator plant. I think that when I look at hydrangea paniculatas, I always thought that they were they're not native, but they're such great pollinator plants. The, PG and Pinky Winky especially, this is a great pollinator plant. You just see bees all over those things in the summertime. And then along comes some breeding in it, and they're much fuller, more dense flowers, and a lot of the flower parts are missing on a lot of them. They're you don't see pollinators on them, or you see very few pollinators on them, or they're struggling to get down in there to get there. So you can make it worse and you can make it better. And it depends on what you're breeding for. I don't mind having a hydrangea paniculata out here that no pollinators are on, because I have a couple paniculatas I pick especially for pollinators that I know have all the flower parts, and then everything else we have going on in the garden, we have lots of opportunity for them out here. So I'm not worried about one plant here or one plant there that has less of an impact on them. But I love all of our seedling dahlias that have the single flowers, because the bees, our native bees, just, they sleep on them overnight. I should charge rent over there. They fill themselves up so much. But yes, it can go both directions, right? Okay, so somebody has their mulch solidified into a mat. It's chunky. Should it be broken up? Sometimes yes. We did that at that house where we did the 5-part design job. Was that 2 years ago now? The mulch was like 9 inches thick. That landscaper that had been hired to maintain that property, they mulched twice a year, didn't matter what it looked like, until they had mulched this deep. And there were dry pockets in it. When we started that job, you could flip a cake of mulch over and hit this dry pocket about 2-3 inches down where there's no water at all in a section of that, because water just couldn't penetrate that top mat of mulch. So yes, if it's solidified into a mat, it probably is best to take some sort of fork and go out there and break it up a bit. It's unfortunately, especially this time of year, potentially going to cause you some issues with there's so many birds out here right now. It would like for me to go away. I mean, so many birds around me right now. It will cause some additional weeds, this time of year, but you do need to get that mulch broken down. And I'm not going to mulch this spring out here. I'm just going to let it go. We'll mulch a little closer to the open garden, so it's really neat looking at that time. But I'd like to get more of this mulch and leaves and everything broken down before then. So the videos this spring, I think they'll still look great, because most of this new growth will come out on everything and you won't see that it's a bit cluttered on the ground, but it'll be a little more cluttery than it normally looks. It won't be quite as crispy. This person has tons of privet, and then they have fruit trees that need pruning. Could they graft the fruit branches onto the privet in zone 7B? And then it said, my name is not Frankenstein. No. Those layers on the tree, the outer layers and the inner part of the wood, those things have to line up. And so you'll see interspecies grafting for sure, like the same the same Japanese maple species can be grafted to the same Japanese maple species for sure. And then you'll see some different species, but same genus, where you can still graft them. You might be able to take like that Tokyo Tower, Kyananthus, the Chinese fringe tree that I have in the garden can, I think, be grafted to our native fringe tree, Kyananthus virginicus. So that's 2 different species, but they're still in the same genus. You're talking here, not even in the same plant family. So you're you're many, many steps away. I mean, most of your fruit trees are in the rose family, not all, but a lot of them are in the rose family. So that they're not even in the same plant family. So you're not the same species, you're not the same genus, you're not the same family, you know what I mean? You may not even be the same order, and those things are going to be incompatible. It's like, weirdly would be trying to like put a monkey arm on a dog or something like that. You know what I mean? It's just, that's the incompatibility of it. Will we do mahogany splendor hibiscus again? Maybe sometime in the future. We had those growing on the outside. We kind of changed that fence area every year, rotate through. I think we had a helianthus over there 2 years ago, and last year we had those beautiful gomphrena, that large fireworks gomphrena behind the fence over there. So we always try to do something that's like a big showstopper over there behind the fence down at the driveway. I don't know what that'll be. I'm sure Steph has probably told me what she's thinking for over there this year, but it's not mahogany. At some point, yes, I do like that mahogany splendor hibiscus. It's easy to do from seed. It grows like crazy all season long. Got to prune it 2-3 times by the end of the season to keep it under control. Doesn't bloom a whole lot for us, but the foliage is beautiful. Let's see. This person had camellias devoured. The lower limbs on their camellias were devoured by deer. This has been, I tell you what, I've read all the deer stuff this year when people saying, there's virtually nothing that it doesn't seem like deer have sampled in people's gardens this year, regardless of how deer resistant they were. For, you know, I guess we've reached a herd now that just has to eat whatever they have to eat during the winter time, and we have all these leafy evergreens growing in our gardens, and regardless of whether they like them or don't like them, it seems like they will eat them if they have to. So their camellia's been limbed up by a deer. Can they underplant it with shorter shrubs? Is this a good idea? Yes. And then they ask if we have any experience with skimmia. So I don't know where you are, but here in this flat clay space in the Piedmont here of North Carolina, I don't have good experience with skimmia. It just doesn't like wet feed. It doesn't seem to like our clay-based soil as much. A great plant, love skimmia, but you know, you have to sometimes say, you know, look at the space that you have. It needs some drainage, good drainage. And then, so my thought on that was to use Sarcococa instead. And then there are various heights of it, but it would be the most skimmia-like plant that's kind of tougher in our clay soils here in Raleigh. Or where, I don't know where you were, you're in 7A in the Triad, so like in Greensboro or Winston-Salem or something like that. Yeah, you would just make sure it's a zone 7 one, and that would probably ultimately be better. This person had conifers crowded by annuals, causing dieback. Will they flush back out? I kind of answered that in a question by accident a little bit earlier. Yes, but unfortunately slow. You can, on a lot of plants, you know, give them a little bit of a haircut, and that will force interior growth that may help speed it up some. Somebody asked about where can they report the lesser celandine sightings in North Carolina, because I said we have this weed showing up out here. It's been up the street 5 or 6 years, a big, unfortunately, an entire back garden of this very nasty invasive weed. Lesser celandine is the common name for it. It looks, unfortunately, like our marshmallow, our native marshmallow. So I think maybe people would look at it and go, oh, you know, maybe even get excited when they have marshmallow, because it blooms beautifully. It has these yellow, both are absolutely beautiful and full of flower. Yellow flowers that just, but unfortunately this is a really nasty invasive weed. There was a thing in Raleigh for a while where they were asking people to report it, and I don't know if it's still going because we're trying to eradicate it. There's no spoiler alert, there's no eradicating it. That place up there that entire back garden got taken over. If it's a moist space and that plant's near you, it's coming, and you got to dig down pretty deep to get it out of the ground. It has these little nodules where it stores energy under the ground, so it's not as dead as you think when you take the top of it off. You got to dig the thing out to get it out, or spray it. And this is one of those that they recommend spraying to kill, just because you've got those nodules under the ground and you're not going to get it any other way. And that's kind of what this chemistry should be for, is those types of issues, right? And not just general spraying to spray, but you know, an issue comes along, that's what we should reserve this chemistry for, you know, is you know, when we have these kinds of issues. But it can be tracked on iNaturalist if you don't have that app. iNaturalist is kind of interesting. It's an app I'll use, and we can, when we're botanizing out in the woods, we use iNaturalist. There's a homeowner's guide to controlling it. There's a PDF, I guess, that can be downloaded as well. And then the invasive species coordinator is Cody Coates for us in this part of North Carolina. And then could planting another ground cover overtake its growth? No. This is the problem with this. Maybe an evergreen ground cover would be helpful in some way. I would imagine something like English ivy or vinca, which I wouldn't recommend planting, could compete with it because it stays evergreen. That's the key. It'd have to stay evergreen. This thing wakes up earlier than anything else. And so it's a plant that wakes up, you don't see it at all, and then January-ish or even December-ish, you'll start to see a little foliage on it, and as it gets a little warmer, and so it blooms before anything else does, and then it goes to sleep as soon as it gets hot. So it's growing in a spot where it's already got some size on it at the same time any of those things would be trying to wake up. So it chokes them out. Holly's not out here today. She had a spot on top of her eye, a little skin tag basically, and we didn't take it off. She had gone to the vet several months ago and didn't take it off just because it's right on top of her eye. Didn't want to mess with it. It was just a small skin tag, wasn't that big of a deal. She's turned it into a big deal. She busted it open, managed to get an infection in it. She was at the vet yesterday. She's wearing a cone. 16-year-old poor dog is wearing a cone. I hate to have to put her in a cone. Would never in a million years want to have her in a cone. But she's in a cone because she won't leave this thing alone. So she's on antibiotics and other things to get to. She had got an infection in it because she wouldn't stop messing with it for a couple of days, and she's made it 10 times bigger than it was. So anyway, she's on medication and hopefully is fine. They won't cut this thing off of her. She's 16 and they don't want to put her under to cut it off of her. So anyway, that's where that is. That's why she's not out here today. She's fine and she's spirited this morning in her cone, running into things. Let's see. Number 20, how do you properly trim a hedge? Electric versus hand pruners versus hedge clippers for proper sun exposure, etc. That would be an entire video. You know, there's lots of pruning videos on the channel, and heck, we've had, within all of the garden task videos, the last month and a half have been pruning, plus the pruning video that we did with Jim and Lynn for the Japanese maple. So lots and lots of pruning related things on here. So if you have a large hedge of like boxwoods or something like that, absolutely hit it with the electric hedge trimmers or gas hedge trimmers and that kind of thing. And you don't have to get in there and really go after every limb. There are some exceptions to that. You know, I really quickly cut off the hydrangea paniculata out by the front fence in a video earlier this week. And, you know, if I leave a lot of wood above the buds on the stem, you know, if I just don't think about what I'm doing and off with its head, it does that little piece of growth that's above that, well, it's not very good on these camellias. I got one of Bobby Green's camellias, which the internodes are very close together. But let me do this real quick. Okay, Jim. Okay, so let's say I'm looking at this camellia right here. If I prune it right there, below the bud up here, but above the bud there, that's where the growth is going to start right there, right? You can see where the growth is going to come from. That little piece of wood that's above that right there is definitely going to die and rot. So the leaf internodes are close on this. You see how close these buds are together. When I say the leaf internodes are close together, these are very close. On other plants, the leaf internodes may be this far apart. And if you leave this much wood above where it's obviously going to leaf out, that's an entry point potentially for disease to, in that dying piece of wood right there. So it's unlikely that that's a place where disease is going to get into, but it's within the realm of possibility. So on those kind of leafy hedges where you've just got so much work to do to get them pruned, I would use the electric or the gas pruners. If there's a couple hydrangeas or plants that you're really, really fond of in the garden, you might go out there with the hand pruners and be a little more delicate and cut down a little bit closer to those buds. So you don't leave that wood that's above that bud where it's going to die and potentially be an entry point for disease. But I probably just confused people right then. There are lots of pruning videos on the channel over the years. So thank you guys very much. Ask questions in the comment section down below this video for the next Q&A. And again, I think there's going to be a midweek one as well. And what else? The $50 off the weekly garden planner goes for another 3 weeks. And again, I'm adding bulking it up. We're going to bulk it up every month. And also, again, I'm going to be at the Charlotte Garden Club on the Monday, 2 Mondays from now as you're watching this. So there'll be another Q&A before that night. And then that Saturday, a week and a half after that, down at Johnson's Nursery from that's from 11 to 12 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So thank you guys so much for following along with the channel and participating in the garden question and answer video. Thanks.